Good evening, and welcome back to tonight's broadcast. Along the US Mexico border, stories have a way of crossing just as easily as people do. Some are passed down by grandparents, others are whispered between friends after dark, and some come from people who insist that legends aren't legends at all. Tonight, three listeners share experiences from different parts of the border. Three encounters tied to stories generations of families have grown up hearing: a woman crying beside the water, a creature that left livestock drained and terrified, and a mysterious rider dressed completely in black. So turn the lights down, put on your headphones, and let's begin. Our first story tonight comes from Veronica in Brownsville, Texas. Like many people who grew up along the border, Veronica heard stories about La Llorona from the time she was a child. Her grandmother warned her that if she ever heard a woman crying near the water after dark, she should never investigate the sound. Veronica stopped believing those stories a long time ago. But one night, while driving home from work, she encountered something beside one of Brownsville's resacas that made her remember every warning her grandmother had ever given her. This is Veronica's story. Hi, tonight's broadcast. My name is Veronica. I'm 36 years old, and I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas. If you're from South Texas or northern Mexico, you've probably heard some version of the story of the La Llorona. I definitely did. My grandmother used to tell us about her when my cousins and I were kids. She said La Llorona was a woman who wandered near rivers and canals at night, crying for her children. Whenever we stayed outside too late, my grandmother would stand at the door and yell, "You better get inside before La Llorona finds you." It worked. We would run inside. But as I got older, I stopped believing any of it. By high school, La Llorona was just another scary story, something adults told children. At least that's what I thought. This happened about 6 years ago. At the time, I worked at a medical office in Brownsville. One Friday, we had a lot of paperwork to finish, so several of us stayed late. By the time I left, it was almost 11 o'clock. Normally, I took the main roads home, but there was another route that saved me about 10 minutes. Part of it ran beside one of the resacas. If you've never been to Brownsville, resacas are old channels of the Rio Grande. During the day, they're beautiful. You see birds, turtles, and people fishing. But some of them feel completely different at night. This particular road didn't have many houses. There were trees on one side and water on the other. That night was extremely humid. There wasn't any wind. I remember because the surface of the water was perfectly still. I had the radio playing quietly. Then, as I came around the curve, my headlights caught something white near the edge of the resaca. At first, I thought it was trash, maybe a plastic bag caught in the weeds. As I got closer, I realized it was too large. It looked like someone was standing there. I slowed down, and it was a woman. At least, I thought it was. She was wearing something long and white. Her back was towards me, and her head was lowered. There weren't any cars parked nearby, no houses close enough for someone to casually walk from. My first thought was that she might be hurt, so I slowed almost to a stop. That's when I heard her crying. My windows were closed, but somehow I could hear it. I turned the radio off, and the crying continued. It was soft, almost like someone trying not to cry loudly. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I also felt guilty about leaving a woman alone beside the water if she needed help. So I lowered my window just a few inches. I called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" The crying stopped immediately. She didn't move. I waited. Then I called again. "Do you need help?" Nothing. I should have driven away. Instead, I sat there. Then the woman slowly lifted one arm. She pointed towards the water. I looked towards the resaca. I couldn't see anything. When I looked back at her, she was facing me. I never saw her turn around. One moment her back was towards me. I looked towards the water for maybe 2 seconds. Then I looked back. She was facing the road. Her hair was hanging over her face, long, dark, wet looking. I couldn't see her eyes. I couldn't see her mouth. Then she started crying again. Except now the crying sounded different. It sounded closer, much closer. almost like it was coming from inside my car. I immediately rolled up the window and locked the doors. I put my foot on the gas. As I started driving away, I looked in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the road. That was impossible. She had been beside the water. I had watched her disappear behind me. There was no way she could have reached the middle of the road that quickly. I accelerated. I looked in the mirror again, and she was gone. I told myself not to panic. There had to be an explanation. Then I heard crying again. This time, it came from the passenger side of my car. I refused to look. I stared straight ahead. The crying got louder. Then I heard a woman's voice. At first, I couldn't understand what she was saying. Then she said it again. Mis hijos, my children. That's when I started crying. I remember gripping the wheel so tightly, my hands hurt. And I started praying. I hadn't prayed the Hail Mary in years, but suddenly I remembered every word. I kept repeating it over and over. Then everything stopped. No crying, no voice, nothing. I drove straight to my parents' house. When my mother opened the door, she immediately asked me what happened. I told her everything. I expected her to tell me I was tired, or that I frightened myself. She didn't. Instead, she asked exactly where it happened. When I told her which resaca, she looked at my father. Then she told me something I'd never heard before. My grandmother claimed she heard La Llorona near the same water when she was younger. Unfortunately, my grandmother had passed away, so I couldn't ask her about it. I spent the night at my parents' house. The next morning, my father went outside to look at my car. A few minutes later, he called me outside. The passenger side window was covered with condensation. None of the other windows were, just that one. And running through the moisture were 5 long streaks. They looked like fingers had dragged slowly down the outside of the glass. I didn't touch them. My father washed the car. Neither of us said much about it. For months afterward, I refused to take the road at night. Eventually, I started driving past the resaca again during the daytime. I've never seen the woman again. Maybe someone really was standing there that night. Maybe the crying was an animal. Maybe being tired made everything seem worse than it was. I've tried to explain it to myself every possible way. But I can't explain how she got into the road. I can't explain the voice beside my passenger window. And I definitely can't explain those marks. I still live in Brownsville. I still drive past resacas all the time. But there's one thing I don't do anymore. If I'm driving after dark and I hear somebody crying near the water, I keep driving. Because maybe my grandmother wasn't trying to scare us when we were children. Maybe she was warning us. Our second story tonight comes from Tomas, who grew up outside Columbus, New Mexico, just a few miles north of the Mexican border. His family kept goats, chickens, and dogs on a small property outside town. One summer, their animals began dying. At first, the family blamed coyotes. Then, Tomas and his father stayed awake one night to see exactly what was getting into their pens. What they saw made them reconsider a legend they'd laughed about for years. Here's Tomas's story. My name is Tomas. I'm 40 years old, but this happened when I was 19. My family lived outside Columbus, New Mexico. My father had a few acres of land. We weren't big ranchers or anything. We had some goats, chickens, and 2 dogs, and whatever else my dad decided to bring home. Growing up there, seeing coyotes wasn't unusual. So when my dad woke up early one morning and told me one of our goats had been killed, neither of us immediately thought anything strange had happened. We walked out to the pen. The goat was lying near the fence. My father looked around. Then he said, "Where's the blood?" I didn't understand what he meant. Then I noticed it. There wasn't much blood anywhere. Coyotes usually tear into an animal. This didn't look like that. There were 2 small wounds near the goat's neck, but almost nothing had been eaten. We figured maybe we'd interrupt whatever attacked it. About a week later, another goat died. Same thing. Then we lost several chickens. That's when my father became determined to find whatever was getting onto the property. We checked the fences, no holes. We installed brighter lights. We moved the animals closer to the house. Nothing helped. Then our dogs started behaving strangely. Normally, if coyotes came anywhere near the property, the dogs went crazy. They'd bark and run along the fence. But now, they hide. One night, I found both dogs underneath my father's truck. Neither one would come out. One of them was shaking. That bothered me more than the dead animals. Because dogs don't know scary stories. Whatever frightened them, they were reacting to something real. My father and I decided to stay awake one night. We turned off most of the lights and sat in the kitchen. Around 1 in the morning, the chickens suddenly started making noise. My father grabbed his flashlight and we went outside. The moment we stepped off the porch, everything became silent. My father swept the flashlight across the yard. Then something moved near the goat pen. At first, I thought it was a coyote. Then it stepped into the light. I remember the skin, gray, not fur. At least I couldn't see fur. Its body was extremely thin. Along its back were raised shapes, almost like ridges. The head was narrow. My father's flashlight hit its eyes. They reflected like reddish-orange color. My dad yelled at it. The thing jumped sideways. It cleared part of the fence in one movement. Then it disappeared into the desert. My father told me to go inside. Neither of us slept much. The next morning, my uncle came over. When we described what we'd seen, he laughed. He said one word, Chupacabra. My father told him to stop talking nonsense. I laughed too. Everybody knew the Chupacabra stories. Something strange attacked livestock at night. Animals are supposedly found drained of blood. People describe a creature with strange skin and spikes along its back. But those were stories. At least, I thought they were. For a couple of weeks, we locked the goats inside at night. Nothing happened. Then one night, I came home late. It was probably around midnight. As I turned onto our dirt road, my headlights illuminated something standing beside the fence. I stopped. It looked directly at me. This time, I got a much better look. It was canine looking, but not exactly like a dog. Its body was too thin. The front legs seemed longer than the back. Its skin looked patchy and rough, and along its spine were those same dark ridges. I've seen pictures of coyotes with mange. I know how strange they can look. Maybe that's what I saw. But then it opened its mouth. The teeth looked extremely long. Then it made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A clicking, almost hissing sound. Then my headlights flickered. The creature stepped towards the road. I put my truck in reverse. It started running along the fence beside me. I backed up faster, and it kept its pace. Finally, I hit the horn. The creature stopped. Then it jumped over the fence, one leap. It disappeared into the darkness. Straight to the house, my father came outside. I told him what happened. This time, he didn't laugh. The next morning, we found tracks. They looked similar to dog tracks, but longer. And the distance between them suggests whatever made them had been running in huge strides. After that night, the killing stopped. We never saw the creature again. Eventually, my parents got rid of most of the livestock. Years later, I started reading about Chupacabra sightings. Scientists and wildlife experts have explained that many supposed chupacabras were probably coyotes or other animals suffering from severe mange. I think that's a reasonable explanation. Maybe that's exactly what we saw. But there are still things I can't explain. Like, why didn't it eat the animals? Why were there only those strange wounds? Why were our dogs terrified of it? And how did the animal clear our fence so easily? A couple of years ago, I drove past the old property. My parents don't live there anymore. Someone replaced the fencing. The goat pen is gone. I slowed down anyway. And without even thinking about it, I looked towards the exact place where my headlights had illuminated that creature all those years ago. There was nothing there, just desert. But I still didn't stop. Because whether it was a chupacabra, a sick coyote, or something else entirely, I know one thing. Something was coming onto our property at night. Something was killing our animals. And whatever it was, I never want to see it again. Our final story tonight comes from Celeste in San Luis, Arizona. Her parents grew up in Sonora, Mexico, and when Celeste was a child, her mother frequently warned her about El Charro Negro, a mysterious rider dressed entirely in black who supposedly appears on lonely roads after midnight. Some versions say he's a cursed man, others say he's something far worse. But almost every version carries the same warning. If the black charro offers you something, don't accept it. Here's Celeste's story. Hi, tonight's broadcast. My name is Celeste. I'm 31 years old and I grew up in San Luis, Arizona. My parents are originally from Sonora. Because of that, I grew up hearing Mexican folklore from both sides of the border: La Llorona, Duendes, La Lechuza. But there was one story that genuinely frightened my mother: El Charro Negro. She described him as a man dressed completely in black who appeared on lonely roads late at night. He rode a black horse. Sometimes he offered people money. Sometimes he offered directions. Sometimes he offered them a ride. According to my mother, none of that mattered. Her warning was always the same: never accept anything from him. And if you see him, don't stop. This happened when I was 22. I'd gone to a birthday party with a friend. After the party, she decided to stay with her boyfriend, so I drove home alone. It was 1 in the morning. There were hardly any cars out. I took a road near one of the irrigation canals because it was faster. I'd driven that road many times, but at night it felt different. Flat fields, black water, nothing but darkness stretching in every direction. I was maybe halfway home when I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was someone riding a bicycle. Then I realized it was much too tall. As I got closer, I realized it was a horse. Someone was sitting on it. I slowed down, and the rider was wearing a wide hat, black jacket, dark pants. Everything was black. Immediately, I remembered my mother's stories. Then I laughed at myself. I was 22 years old. I wasn't going to panic because someone happened to be riding a horse at night. As I approached, the rider raised one hand. He wanted me to stop. I didn't. I moved into the opposite lane to give him room. As I passed, I looked through my passenger window. I couldn't see his face. His hat cast a shadow over it, but I saw the horse's eyes. They reflected bright white. I drove past. A few seconds later, I checked my mirror. The road was empty. That was strange. There wasn't a driveway nearby, no crossroad, nowhere obvious the horse could go. Still, I continued driving. Then I heard something. Hoofbeats. At first, I thought my imagination was getting the better of me. Then they got louder. I looked into my passenger mirror. The horse was running beside my car. The rider was still on it. I looked at my speedometer. I was doing almost 50. I screamed and accelerated. 55, then 60. The horse stayed beside me. The rider slowly turned his head towards my window. I still couldn't see his face, just darkness underneath the hat. Then he reached towards my car. Something struck the passenger door. I swerved. My tires hit gravel. I corrected the steering, and when I looked towards the passenger side again, the horse was gone. I accelerated again. I wanted to get home. Then something appeared ahead of me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing: the rider. He was standing in the middle of the road. There was no possible way he could have gotten ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes. The car stopped maybe 30 feet away. The horse didn't move. Neither did the rider. We just stayed there, facing each other. Then he slowly raised one arm. He pointed towards the canal. I don't know why, but I looked. Something dark was floating in the water. It looked like clothing. I immediately turned back towards the road, and the rider was closer, much closer. I never saw him move. He was maybe 15 feet from my hood. I threw the car in reverse. Then, when my radio turned to static, every light on my dashboard flickered. Then a voice came through the speakers. It was male, very low. I couldn't understand most of it, but one word came through clearly: Ven, come. I started praying. I was screaming the words. I backed up until I almost drove into a ditch. Then I turned the wheel and drove around the rider. As I passed him, I refused to look. The radio continued hissing. Then I smelled smoke. Not cigarette smoke. Not something coming from the engine. It smelled like burnt wood. And underneath it, smelled like sulfur. I drove all the way home. The moment I turned onto my parents' neighborhood, the radio came back. Normal music, like nothing had happened. I pulled into the driveway and sat there crying. My father finally came outside, and before I could tell him anything, he walked around the car. Then he stopped. He asked, "What happened to your door?" There was a long black mark across the passenger side. It looked burned into the paint. I told my parents everything. My mother went pale. The first thing she asked was, "Did he give you anything?" I said no. Then she asked, "Did you stop for him?" I told her I only stopped because he appeared in front of the car. My mother looked at me and said, "Never drive that road at night again." And I didn't. Not for years. Eventually, I moved away. My parents still live in the area. I asked my father about the mark years later. He remembered it. He said they tried washing it off, but nothing. They tried polishing it, and still nothing. Eventually, we sold the car. The mark was still there. Maybe someone can explain what I saw. Maybe exhaustion made the horse seem faster than it was. Maybe the radio malfunctioned. Maybe something from the road hit my passenger door. But I know what my mother told me when I was a child. If you see a man dressed completely in black waiting beside a lonely road after midnight, don't stop. Don't speak to him. And whatever he offers you, don't take it. Because according to the stories, El Charro Negro never gives you anything for free. Could every one of tonight's stories have a perfectly reasonable explanation? Absolutely. But I'll leave that decision to you. And if your parents or grandparents ever warned you about something when you were young, something you laughed about at the time, I'd love to hear about it. Maybe you've encountered something strange in the desert. Or maybe there's another legend from your family or hometown that deserves to be told. Send your experience to tonight's broadcast 77@gmail.com, and it may be featured in a future episode. To everyone listening tonight, keep the doors locked, keep the headlights on, and every once in a while, listen to the warnings that were passed down before us. Until the shadows call again, good night.